My name is Elena Martinez. I'm 62 years old, fighting stage 4 cancer, and a devoted mother to my 30-year-old twins, Isabella and Lucas. 3 weeks ago, I collapsed in agony and called my husband Richard from the ambulance. I begged him to watch the twins while doctors rushed me into emergency chemo. His text back, "Deal with it yourself. I'm out with Carla tonight." Lying in that hospital bed, tubes in my arms, I uncovered his secret. For 10 years, I'd been sending him $4,500 every month, money he called loans to fund his double life with that woman, his sports car, their lavish getaways. $540,000 total, gone in an instant. I cut every transfer. 1 week later, there was a knock at my door. Grandma Rosa stood there, my 85-year-old rock, holding a gold-embossed invite to her birthday gala. "The whole family comes, dear. 50 people. Time for the truth to shatter them all." If you're drawn to stories where quiet strength outlasts cruelty, subscribe now and stay with me through what came next. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear, a sharp metallic scent that clung to my clothes long after I left. I remember the ceiling tiles sliding past above me as the gurney rolled, each light blurring into the next, my body shaking with pain that felt like fire under my skin. Nurses spoke in calm, practiced voices, but I could hear urgency hiding underneath. Emergency chemotherapy was not a phrase you expect to hear at my age, not after a life spent planning retirement dinners and Sunday phone calls with my twins. I kept thinking of Isabella's laugh and Lucas's steady way of listening, and how I needed Richard to be there for them just this once. My phone buzzed with his reply, cold and final, and something inside me cracked open in that moment, wider than the cancer ever could. I had believed, foolishly, that marriage was a shelter. For 37 years, I told myself that even when love thinned, loyalty remained. Richard and I had built a life that looked solid from the outside. A brick house in a quiet neighborhood, 2 successful children, dinners with friends who thought we were unbreakable. I paid the bills, managed the accounts, smoothed over his moods. When he asked for money, always framed as short-term help or an investment, I didn't hesitate. I trusted him because trust was the habit of my life. Sitting in that hospital bed, IV lines taped to my arms, I finally understood that habit had blinded me. The night after my first chemo session, when the ward grew quiet and the machines hummed like distant engines, I asked a nurse to bring me my purse. My hands trembled as I opened my banking app, not because of the medication, but because a strange instinct told me to look. Line after line of transfers stared back at me, familiar amounts I had stopped questioning years ago. $4,500, every single month, like clockwork. I began adding them up on the Notepad app, my breath shallow, my heart pounding harder than it had during the ambulance ride. $540,000, more than $500,000 quietly siphoned away while I planned grocery lists and family holidays. I lay there staring at the total, listening to the soft beeping beside me, and felt something shift from grief into clarity. Cancer had stripped away my patience for lies. I remembered every time Richard had shrugged off my questions, every joke about his business opportunities, every late night explained away with vague excuses. I saw now how carefully he had trained me not to look too closely. The realization didn't make me cry. It made me calm. Calm enough to log into my accounts and stop every transfer with a single tap. Calm enough to know that consequences, once delayed, were about to arrive. When I was discharged days later, weak and pale, the house felt unfamiliar, like a stage set after the actors have gone home. The twins hovered, worried, trying not to show it, and I told them only what they needed to know. Richard didn't come back that night, or the next. I slept on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender, listening to the clock tick in the kitchen, and thinking about how silence can be louder than shouting. I didn't call him. I didn't explain. I waited, because waiting had become my unexpected strength. A week passed, marked by medication alarms and careful steps through the house, when the knock came. 3 firm taps, confident, like someone who knew they belonged. When I opened the door, there stood Grandma Rosa, straight back despite her 85 years, eyes sharp and assessing as ever. She held out an envelope heavy with embossed gold lettering, the kind reserved for events meant to be remembered. Her smile was small but knowing. "It's time," she said softly, as if we were discussing tea. "Everyone will be there." I felt a shiver run through me that had nothing to do with my illness. Grandma Rosa had always been the quiet authority in our family, a retired judge who understood timing better than anyone I knew. As a child, I watched her listen more than she spoke, then deliver words that ended arguments with surgical precision. Seeing her on my doorstep, invitation in hand, I understood this was no coincidence. She had seen through Richard long before I had. She stepped inside, surveyed the room, and met my eyes with a look that said she knew exactly how much I had endured and how much more I was capable of facing. That night, as I lay awake replaying her words, the weight of the invitation pressed on my chest heavier than fear. 50 relatives, 50 witnesses. Richard would be there. Carla would likely be there too, draped in confidence she hadn't earned. I closed my eyes and pictured their faces when the truth finally stepped into the light, guided by the one person they could never dismiss. I didn't yet know how it would unfold, only that the gala would change everything, and that the first move was already in motion. The first sign that something was wrong with Richard hadn't been Carla, or the money, or even the nights he didn't come home. It had been smaller, quieter, an impatience that crept into his voice whenever my health became inconvenient. Years before the diagnosis, when fatigue first slowed me down, he'd sigh as if my body were a bill he hadn't agreed to pay. I told myself it was stress, aging, the weight of long routines. Love makes excuses before it makes decisions. Looking back now, I can see how he had already begun to detach, testing how much distance he could put between us without being noticed. After the hospital, that impatience turned into open disdain. When he finally did text me again, 2 days after Grandma Rosa's visit, it wasn't to ask how I was feeling. It was to complain that his credit card had been declined at a restaurant downtown. The message popped up while I was measuring out pills at the kitchen counter, my hands steady, my heart oddly detached. "Did you mess with the account?" he wrote, followed by a laughing emoji that felt like a slap. I didn't answer. Silence, I was learning, could be a weapon when used deliberately. I started paying closer attention to the memories I had once brushed aside, the way Richard used to linger near my computer when I paid bills, hovering until I closed the screen, the sudden interest he took in my mother's inheritance when Grandma Rosa downsized her home, the questions framed as jokes. "You'd tell me if you changed your will, right?" At the time, I had laughed along, believing transparency was mutual. Now those moments lined up like evidence waiting to be presented, each one pointing toward a greed that had been patiently sharpening its teeth. The twins noticed the shift too. Isabella sat with me one afternoon, sunlight slanting through the blinds, and asked why Dad hadn't been around. I chose my words carefully, not because I wanted to protect Richard, but because I wanted to protect them from being pulled into a storm they didn't deserve. "He's busy," I said, hating the familiarity of that lie. Lucas watched me from across the room, his jaw tight, seeing more than his sister did. Children, even grown ones, know when something essential has broken. As my strength slowly returned between treatments, my mind grew sharper. I began reconstructing our financial life the way an investigator reconstructs a crime scene. Statements printed and spread across the dining table, dates circled in red ink, patterns emerging where I had once seen randomness. Richard's requests always coincided with my moments of vulnerability, after surgeries, during stressful family events, when my attention was elsewhere. He hadn't just taken my money, he had taken advantage of my trust at its weakest points. The realization burned, but it also fueled me. Late one night, unable to sleep, I logged into a shared cloud folder we had barely used. Old receipts, scanned contracts, and forgotten documents waited there like ghosts. I found hotel invoices from cities he claimed were business trips, charges for luxury items I had never seen, and a lease agreement for a storage unit across town. My pulse quickened as I downloaded everything, saving copies to a drive I kept hidden beneath my clothes drawer. This wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. Cancer had taught me that pretending danger isn't there doesn't make it disappear. Richard finally came home on a Friday evening, smelling of expensive cologne and impatience. He looked around the living room as if expecting applause for his return. "We need to talk," he said, already irritated. I studied him the way one studies a stranger, noting how little concern flickered across his face when he looked at me. He spoke about expenses, about how unfair it was that I'd overreacted by cutting him off. Not once did he ask about my treatment. Not once did he lower his voice for the twins' sake. In that moment, any remaining illusion dissolved completely. When he finished his monologue, I met his eyes and said only, "I'm not discussing money anymore." The shock on his face was almost comical. He laughed, sharp and dismissive, and told me I didn't understand how things worked. That I'd regret acting emotional. I let him believe that. People like Richard underestimate quiet resolve because it doesn't look like a threat. As he stormed out again, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, I felt a strange sense of relief. The lines had been drawn. After he left, my phone buzzed once more, this time with a notification that someone had tried to access my account from an unfamiliar device. I stared at the alert, my chest tightening, and realized that cutting off the money had only been the first move. Whatever Richard planned next, it was coming faster than I'd expected, and it wouldn't stay hidden for long. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my body aching in that familiar way that told me the medication was wearing off. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a garbage truck somewhere down the street. I wrapped myself in a sweater and went straight to the dining table, where the papers from the night before still lay spread out like an unfinished confession. This was no longer about suspicion. It was about confirmation, about understanding exactly how deep Richard's betrayal went and how deliberately it had been constructed over time. I started with the bank statements, month by month, year by year. At first glance, the transfers looked harmless, almost boring in their consistency. Same amount, same description. Same casual note he'd insisted on. Temporary loan. I remembered how he'd smiled when he convinced me to label them that way, joking about how it would keep things clean. Clean. The word felt obscene now. As I lined the statements up chronologically, a different picture emerged. Every increase in his spending aligned with milestones in my life. Birthdays, anniversaries, moments when I was emotionally distracted and less likely to ask questions. I noticed patterns I had never allowed myself to see before. Transfers just days before Valentine's Day. Larger withdrawals every summer. Charges at hotels in cities we had never visited together. I cross-referenced dates with my calendar, my stomach tightening as I realized how often his absences coincided with my hospital visits, my migraines, my moments of weakness. Richard hadn't just lived a double life. He had scheduled it around my suffering. That realization settled in my chest like cold iron, heavy, but grounding. I opened my laptop and logged into the credit monitoring service I had signed up for years ago and mostly ignored. My hands hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I typed his name into the search bar. What came up made my breath catch. 2 credit cards I didn't recognize. A personal line of credit opened under a joint address. Applications I had never seen, never signed. He hadn't forged my name outright. He'd used my trust, my access, my silence. Everything was technically legal, carefully structured just enough to avoid immediate alarms. It was calculated, methodical, cruel in its restraint. As the sun rose, painting the kitchen walls in pale gold, I moved on to the storage unit receipt I'd found the night before. I drove there later that afternoon, my body protesting every step but my mind sharper than it had been in years. The facility was quiet, rows of metal doors reflecting the heat, the air smelling of dust and oil. I stood in front of the unit listed on the contract, my heart pounding as I unlocked it with a key Richard had hidden in an old coat pocket. Inside were boxes labeled in Carla's neat handwriting, designer shoes, framed photos of places I had never been, A spare set of golf clubs far nicer than the ones Richard kept at home. I didn't cry. I cataloged. I photographed everything carefully, methodically, the way Grandma Rosa once taught me to take notes when the truth mattered more than emotion. Each item felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. This wasn't a fling. This was a parallel life funded by my labor, my inheritance, my willingness to believe. I closed the unit, locked it again, and returned the key to my pocket, knowing Richard would assume everything remained exactly where he left it. That evening, Isabella joined me at the table again. She watched silently as I organized folders on my laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting in her eyes. "Mom," she said gently, "are you sure you want to know all of this?" I looked at her and smiled, a real smile, steady and calm. "I already know enough," I told her. "Now I'm just making it undeniable." Lucas nodded from the doorway, his expression grim but supportive. They didn't ask for details. They didn't need them. They trusted me, the way I had once trusted their father. Richard, meanwhile, grew more reckless. His messages became sharper, more frequent, swinging between guilt-laced apologies and thinly veiled threats. He reminded me of everything he'd done for our family, of the years he'd stood by me. I read each message once and archived it, saving copies without responding. Every word he sent only strengthened the case he didn't know he was building against himself. People who think they're in control talk too much. They reveal themselves without realizing it. Late that night, when the house was dark and the twins asleep, I sat alone with my laptop and opened a fresh document. I began listing dates, amounts, locations, everything that connected Richard's lies to tangible proof. It wasn't revenge that drove me then. It was dignity. I refused to let my story be rewritten as weakness. Cancer had already taken enough from me. It would not take my voice or my truth. As I saved the document and closed the computer, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from a private investigator service I'd contacted earlier that day, confirming they'd accepted my case and would begin work immediately. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening, knowing that what I had uncovered so far was only the surface. Whatever came next would expose Richard in ways even he hadn't prepared for. And once uncovered, there would be no turning back. The investigator's first report arrived 3 days later, tucked into my inbox with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I waited until the twins had left for work before opening it, my coffee cooling untouched beside me. The file was thick. Screenshots, timelines, geotags, and it confirmed what my instincts already screamed. Richard hadn't been careless. He'd been bold. Carla Voss wasn't a secret kept in shadows. She was a fixture in a life he had curated with precision, one weekend at a time, funded by my patience and my money. The photos were clean and devastating. Richard and Carla stepping out of a boutique hotel, her hand on his arm, his smile wide and relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. Dinner receipts time-stamped during my chemo sessions. Airline confirmations for destinations he'd sworn he hated. One image caught my breath. The two of them laughing beside a red sports car, his sports car, parked in a coastal driveway at sunset. The investigators' notes were clinical, almost kind in their neutrality, but the facts needed no commentary. This wasn't a mistake. This was a life he chose every single day. I scrolled through the reports slowly, deliberately, as if pacing myself through a storm. The dates overlapped with some of the worst moments of my illness. There he was in Miami while I vomited through the night. There he was in Napa while doctors explained staging and prognosis. He had sat beside me in waiting rooms, hand on mine, then boarded flights to her arms. I felt a tightening in my chest. Not pain, not grief, but a sharpening resolve. Betrayal loses its power when it's fully illuminated. I printed the report and slid it into a folder marked simply Family. The name made me smile, thin and ironic. This wasn't about public shaming. This was about accountability in the only arena that mattered to Richard, the people whose approval he craved. Grandma Rosa had always said that truth lands hardest when witnesses are chosen wisely. I understood now why she'd waited, why the invitation had arrived precisely when it did. She had been preparing this stage long before I realized I was part of the play. That evening, Richard showed up unannounced, his mood oddly upbeat. He carried takeout like a peace offering and talked too much, a sure sign of nerves. He joked about my overreaction, about how Carla was just a friend, about how money moved around in marriages all the time. I listened, nodding, letting him build his flimsy defenses aloud. Every lie he offered sounded rehearsed, as if he'd practiced them in the mirror. When he reached for my hand, I gently withdrew it. "I'm tired," I said. "We'll talk later." He left irritated, convinced he still controlled the tempo. After the door closed, I sat at the kitchen table and let myself feel it. All of it. The humiliation, the anger, the loss of the man I thought I'd married. I allowed the tears to come, slow and quiet, then wiped them away. Grief has its place, but it doesn't get to drive. I reminded myself of Grandma Rosa's steady gaze, of the way she'd once told me that justice doesn't require shouting, only preparation. I wasn't seeking to hurt Richard. I was seeking to end his ability to hurt me. The investigator followed up with more details. Carla's financial dependence, her pressure on Richard to secure assets, her casual references to my supposed frailty in text messages. Yes, I read them. Yes, it hurt. And yes, it clarified everything. Carla wasn't just complicit. She was confident. Confident that I was too sick, too kind, too distracted to notice. That confidence would be her undoing. I saved the messages, labeled and dated, and added them to the folder. I began rehearsing conversations in my head. Not confrontations, but conclusions. What I would say to the twins. What I would say, or not say, to Richard. How I would stand in a room filled with relatives and let the truth speak without raising my voice. There is a particular strength in restraint, one that unsettles liars more than rage ever could. I practiced breathing through my ribs, the way the oncology nurse had taught me, grounding myself in the present. The night before Grandma Rosa's gala, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. A single line appeared on the screen. "We need to talk before tomorrow. Please." I stared at it for a long moment, then set the phone face down. Tomorrow was already planned. The stage was set, and once the music started, there would be no stopping what came next. I didn't reply to the message. I slept instead, or something close to it, my mind hovering between resolve and exhaustion. Morning arrived with a thin winter light that crept across the bedroom floor, and for the first time since my diagnosis, I felt ahead of events rather than trapped beneath them. Cancer teaches you to measure strength differently. Some days it's standing up without dizziness. Other days it's choosing not to answer a text that could derail everything. I brewed coffee, swallowed my pills, and waited for the sound I knew would come. The knock was gentle this time, followed by the unmistakable cadence of a cane on tile. Grandma Rosa entered like a calm front moving through a room. No rush, no drama, only certainty. She wore a tailored coat the color of slate, hair pinned neatly, eyes bright with intelligence and care. "Sit," she said, pointing to the kitchen table. I obeyed, smiling despite myself. She placed her handbag down, opened it, and set out a thin leather portfolio with practiced precision. "Before the party," she said, "we align." She spoke the way judges do when the decision is already made. She asked what I had stopped, what I intended to allow. I showed her the folders, the investigator's report, the statements, the screenshots. She skimmed, nodded, asked one or two surgical questions, then closed the portfolio. "Good," she said. "You've preserved evidence and your dignity. Now we ensure timing." She explained calmly that she had updated her own estate plan months earlier, quietly, placing temporary controls on certain family trusts and naming me as her medical power of attorney should anything happen to her before the gala. Not because she expected trouble, she said, but because foresight is kindness to oneself. We talked about Richard without saying his name much. She called him the man who confuses entitlement with effort. She reminded me that public truth doesn't require cruelty. It requires clarity. "You won't argue," she said. You won't interrupt. You will let him speak. People reveal themselves when they think the room belongs to them. I watched her hands as she spoke, steady, precise, and felt a familiar grounding, the same comfort I'd known as a child sitting at her kitchen table while she graded papers and listened to my worries without rushing me. After she left, I gathered what remained to be done. I scheduled credit freezes, updated passwords, and created a read-only timeline of transactions with annotations simple enough for anyone to understand. I drafted a brief statement for the twins, facts only, no adjectives, and sent it, telling them we would talk after the gala. Lucas replied with a single word, "Here." Isabella sent a heart and a promise to stand beside me. Their restraint told me everything I needed to know. Richard tried again that afternoon. Voicemail this time. His tone slid between contrition and threat, like a pendulum searching for leverage. He warned me not to embarrass the family. He suggested I was confused by medication. He said we could fix this privately. I saved the message. I made tea. I practiced the breathing again, counting the rise and fall of my chest, reminding myself that my body was not the weakest thing in the room anymore. The gala invitation sat on the mantel, heavy paper catching the light. Gold embossing, formal script. Grandma Rosa's name centered like a seal of authority. 50 relatives meant 50 histories, 50 biases, 50 reasons to look away or lean in. I chose a dress that night, simple and elegant, something that didn't try to hide my illness or announce it. I wanted to look like myself, a woman who had lived, endured, and decided. I placed the evidence drive into a small clutch and set it by the door, not as a weapon, but as insurance. As evening approached, a courier arrived with a small box. Inside was a single white orchid and a note in Richard's handwriting. For us, it read. The audacity almost made me laugh. I set the flower in water and placed it on the windowsill, where it could be appreciated without being believed. There are gestures that arrive too late. They do not undo what has already been chosen. Just before midnight, Grandma Rosa called. Her voice was warm, unhurried. Tomorrow, she said, you will hear noise. Let it pass over you. Remember, truth doesn't need volume. I thanked her and hung up, feeling the weight of the coming day settle into my bones. Not fear, but inevitability. I turned off the lights, knowing that by this time tomorrow, Richard's story would no longer be his to tell. Morning broke with a brittle clarity, the kind that sharpens edges and leaves no room for excuses. I woke before the alarm, my body stiff but cooperative, as if it understood the importance of the day ahead. Outside, the neighborhood hummed with ordinary life, sprinklers ticking, a dog barking 2 houses down, while inside, everything felt staged, deliberate. I moved slowly, intentionally, letting the routine anchor me. Medication first, water second, breath steady. Control, I reminded myself, begins with small decisions honored consistently. I dressed at the kitchen table, laying out each item as though it were part of a ceremony. The dress was slate blue silk, simple lines, no ornamentation, elegant without pleading for attention. Shoes low and comfortable, jewelry minimal. I wanted nothing to distract from the facts. In the mirror, I studied my face, thinner now, paler, eyes clearer than I remembered. Cancer had taken softness. It had not taken resolve. I practiced a neutral expression, one that could listen without reacting. The oncologist had once told me to conserve energy. Today, that advice applied to emotion. The evidence went into the clutch in a precise order. First, the timeline. Clean, readable, dates bolded, amounts spelled out. Next, the investigator's summary with photographs arranged chronologically, captions factual, no commentary. Then the messages, printed and redacted only where necessary, to keep the focus on conduct rather than cruelty. Finally, a short index at the front, a map for anyone who wanted to understand quickly. Grandma Rosa had taught me that clarity is an act of respect, even for people who haven't earned it. I made copies, one for the twins, one for Grandma Rosa, one sealed and labeled for myself. Redundancy isn't paranoia, it's prudence. I uploaded encrypted backups and checked access permissions twice. Then I shut the laptop and sat quietly, hands folded, listening to the clock mark time in steady, impartial seconds. This was not about winning an argument. It was about ending a fiction. Richard texted again mid-morning. "We can talk at the party," he wrote, followed by a smiling face that felt rehearsed. I imagined him practicing in the mirror, the version of himself he planned to present. Remorseful husband, misunderstood provider, victim of circumstances. He would count on my illness to soften the room. He would count on my kindness to keep me quiet. I did not reply. Silence, once chosen, becomes a boundary others must work to cross. The twins arrived together just after noon. Isabella hugged me carefully, as if afraid I might break. Lucas squeezed my shoulder, solid and reassuring. We sat at the table where so much evidence had been assembled and dismantled, and I gave them the statement I'd promised. Facts only, no adjectives, no editorial. I watched their faces as they read, the way disbelief hardened into understanding. Isabella's eyes filled, Lucas's jaw set. Neither asked me to stop. "We're with you," Lucas said simply. That was enough. We discussed logistics, not feelings. Where they would stand. When they would leave if things became too loud. What not to say, no matter the provocation. We agreed on a signal, a hand on my forearm if I needed a pause. There would be no shouting, no scenes. If voices rose, we would wait. Truth doesn't need reinforcement when it's documented. Before they left to dress, Isabella pressed her forehead to mine. "You don't owe anyone softness today," she whispered. I smiled. "I owe myself steadiness," I said. By late afternoon, the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and quiet resolve. I set the orchid by the door, not as a token, but as a reminder that gestures without accountability are just decorations. I checked the clutch once more, then placed it beside my keys. The phone buzzed with a message from Carla's number, though she didn't sign it. "Please don't do this," it read. "We can explain." The presumption made me exhale a short, incredulous laugh. Explain to whom? On whose terms? I archived the message without comment. The drive to the venue felt longer than it was. Grandma Rosa's gala was being held at a restored hall downtown, all polished wood and warm lighting, the kind of place that photographs well and remembers everything. As we pulled up, valet lights flared like small suns, and voices spilled into the evening air. Laughter, greetings, the easy noise of family. I stepped out of the car slowly, grounding myself in the sensation of my feet on stone, the coolness of the night against my skin. This was not a battlefield. It was a room with rules. Inside, the hall glowed. Tables dressed in linen, candles steady and bright, arrangements understated but precise. Grandma Rosa had chosen well. I spotted relatives across the room, familiar faces carrying assumptions like handbags. I felt the eyes land on me, the brief flicker of concern, curiosity, calculation. Richard was near the bar, laughing too loudly, posture open, performing ease. Carla stood beside him in a dress that tried hard to belong. When our eyes met, Richard's smile faltered, then recovered. He lifted a glass, as if toasting survival. I inclined my head once and moved on. Grandma Rosa found me near the center, her presence immediate and anchoring. She took my hand, squeezed it once. "Good," she said, assessing without asking. "You look ready." We exchanged no more than that. She had taught me long ago that public rooms reward brevity. The evening unfolded with speeches and toasts, the rhythm of celebration carrying people forward. I listened, smiled when appropriate, conserved energy. Richard spoke to a small cluster nearby, glancing my way more often than he intended. Each time, he looked reassured by my calm. He mistook it for uncertainty. As dinner was served, the room settled into a comfortable hum. Silverware chimed softly. Wine was poured. I ate lightly, enough to keep my strength, and drank water. Carla leaned in to whisper something to Richard. His shoulders relaxed, emboldened. He began circulating, shaking hands, telling stories that positioned him as generous, beset, misunderstood. I recognized the pattern. He was laying narrative groundwork, counting on momentum to carry him past scrutiny. He had always preferred monologue to dialogue. Grandma Rosa rose near the end of the main course, tapping her glass with the gentlest sound. The room quieted out of habit and respect. She spoke of family, of continuity, of responsibility that outlives comfort. She thanked those who had come, those who had traveled, those who had stayed when staying was difficult. Her voice never wavered. As she spoke, I felt the temperature in the room change. Not dramatically, not yet, but perceptibly, like a shift in weather. Richard straightened, readying his smile. When she finished, applause rippled. She gestured for me to join her. I stood, heart steady, and walked to her side. The room watched. Richard took a step forward, then stopped. Carla's expression tightened. Grandma Rosa's hand found my elbow, firm and reassuring. "Before we continue," she said evenly, "there are matters of clarity to address." The word clarity settled into the room like a held breath. I opened my clutch, fingertips cool against the metal clasp, and felt the familiar weight of preparation. Across the hall, Richard's face shifted. Not fear yet, but calculation. He was still deciding which version of himself to present. I met his eyes and offered nothing back. Not anger, not pleading, only presence, the kind that waits. Grandma Rosa did not rush. She never rushed. She allowed the silence to expand just enough to gather attention, to pull wandering thoughts back into the room. 50 people is not a crowd. It is a chorus, ready to echo whatever note is struck first. Richard shifted his weight, lifted his glass again as if to signal normalcy, and smiled toward the nearest table. Carla angled her body closer to him, a subtle claim. I stood still, hands folded, feeling the room breathe around us. Richard took the opening he believed was his. "Family?" he began, voice warm and practiced. "Before we get too serious, I just want to say how grateful I am, to Rosa, to everyone, for being here tonight." He chuckled lightly, a man at ease. "We've all had a tough year. Health scares, stress, misunderstandings." His eyes flicked to me, then away. "But what matters is love and forgiveness. We handle things privately. That's what families do." A few nods appeared, a few murmurs of agreement. Momentum is persuasive when unchallenged. He continued, emboldened. "Elena and I, well, we've always managed our finances together. Sometimes things look messy on paper, but that's marriage. You support each other. You make sacrifices." He raised his glass again, higher this time. "So let's celebrate Rosa. Let's not turn a birthday into a courtroom." Laughter rippled, uneven but present. Carla smiled, relieved. Richard exhaled, convinced he'd steered the room back onto safe ground. Grandma Rosa tilted her head, considering him the way a judge considers a witness who has spoken too freely. "You're right about one thing," she said calmly. "Clarity matters, and families do deserve it." She turned slightly toward the room. "That's why we won't argue. We'll simply review." Her gaze returned to Richard. Briefly, the word landed with precision. I stepped forward half a pace and placed the index on the lectern, aligning it carefully. The soft thud cut through the chatter. "This is a timeline," I said, my voice even, unhurried. 10 years, monthly transfers, same amount, same description. I did not name him yet. I did not name Carla. I let the structure speak first. Heads leaned in, phones lowered. The room narrowed its focus. Richard laughed again, sharper this time. "Elena, sweetheart, this isn't the place." Grandma Rosa raised one finger. He stopped mid-sentence, startled by the authority he could not override. She nodded to me. I turned a page. "Here are the totals," I continued. $540,000. I spelled it out, slowly. A murmur rolled through the hall like a low tide turning. Someone dropped a fork. Carla's smile faltered, then fixed itself again. Richard's tone shifted. "Those were loans," he said quickly. "Short-term. Business. Everyone knew that." Grandma Rosa glanced at him. "Everyone?" she asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Elena did. She approved them. I met his eyes for the first time since taking the floor. I approved what I was told, I said. Temporary support, not a second household. I turned the page again. Photographs appeared. Tasteful, factual, dated. A hotel entrance, a coastal driveway, a red sports car. I didn't linger. I didn't editorialize. I named dates that overlapped with my treatments and let the room do the arithmetic. Carla stiffened, whispering urgently to Richard. He shook his head, too late. "This is invasive," he snapped, the warmth gone. "You hired someone to spy on me?" His voice rose, cracking the calm he had tried to cultivate. Grandma Rosa stepped in, her voice softer than his and far more commanding. "You were not spied upon," she said. "Your transactions were reviewed. Your representations were compared to records. This is not spectacle. It is reconciliation with facts." She turned to the room. "I asked for this to be addressed here because stories harden when they're told in corners. Light prevents that." Richard tried a different tack. He gestured broadly, appealing to sentiment. "I stood by Elena for years," he said. "Caregiving is hard. People make mistakes." A few faces wavered, sympathy briefly engaged. Grandma Rosa nodded. "Caregiving is hard," she agreed. "Abandonment is easier, especially when funded." The room went very still. Carla's face drained of color. I placed the final page on the lectern, a summary, plain and clean. "The transfers were stopped," I said. "Accounts secured. No accusations beyond what's documented." I closed the folder. "I'm not asking for judgment. I'm ending confusion." My hands were steady. My breath was steady. I felt the strength of having chosen restraint. Richard's voice broke through, louder now, edged with panic. "This is a misunderstanding," he insisted. "We can explain." Grandma Rosa met his gaze, unwavering. "You've explained," she said. "At length." She turned back to the family. "We'll proceed with the evening." The dismissal was total. A hush held for a beat longer. Then conversation resumed in a different key. Lower, cautious, recalibrated. Chairs shifted. People avoided Richard's eyes. Carla whispered again. He stared at the floor, then at me, searching for something to push against. I offered nothing. The power of the moment lay in its completeness. He had spoken. The record had answered. As servers cleared plates, Grandma Rosa leaned toward me. "We're almost there," she murmured. Across the room, Richard gathered himself for one last attempt, straightening his jacket, rehearsing a smile that wouldn't quite form. I felt it then, the brink of it, the moment when performance gives way to consequence. The room was ready, and Grandma Rosa had one final sentence to deliver. Grandma Rosa waited for the room to settle, not into comfort, but into attention. She had that gift, the ability to gather people without asking. When she spoke, her voice was neither raised nor softened. It was precise, the way truth sounds when it no longer needs permission. "I want to be very clear," she said, eyes moving across familiar faces, lingering just long enough on each. Tonight was never about embarrassment. It was about accuracy. She turned slightly toward Richard, not confrontational, simply inclusive. Accuracy protects families from stories that rot in the dark. A few people nodded. Someone exhaled audibly. Richard swallowed. She continued. "Months ago, I adjusted my estate plans. Quietly. Not out of suspicion. Out of prudence." She paused. "Certain discretionary trusts now require dual authorization for disbursement. Others are temporarily frozen pending routine review." The words were ordinary. The effect was not. Faces shifted, calculations began. Carla's hand tightened on Richard's sleeve. Grandma Rosa did not look at Carla when she spoke next. "This has nothing to do with punishment. It has everything to do with stewardship." She faced the room again. "When money moves without honesty, it stops being support and becomes extraction." The phrasing landed like a seal on a document. I saw it then. The exact moment comprehension spread. The shattered faces. Not dramatic, not explosive, just the quiet collapse of assumptions. Richard tried to speak. The sound came out thin. "Rosa, surely—" She lifted a hand, not to silence him, but to finish. Richard, you've had ample opportunity to clarify your representations. You chose performance. She turned to me and rested a hand over mine, warm and grounding. Elena chose preparation. The room shifted fully now. Chairs angled away from Richard. Conversations ceased around him. A cousin he relied on for easy laughter looked down at her napkin. An uncle cleared his throat and did not meet his eye. Carla released his sleeve and stepped back, the confidence she'd worn all evening slipping like a dress that never fit. It was not cruelty that did this. It was alignment. Grandma Rosa concluded with a kindness that felt earned. "We'll celebrate tonight," she said. "We'll sing, we'll eat cake, and tomorrow we'll continue our lives with fewer illusions." Applause followed, not thunderous, but sustained, respectful, real. She stepped back. The matter closed because she had closed it. I did not add anything. I didn't need to. People approached me quietly. An aunt's squeeze of my shoulder. A cousin's whispered apology for not seeing sooner. I accepted each without embellishment. The twins stood close, present but not protective. They didn't need to be. The truth had done its work. Richard lingered at the edge of the room, smaller somehow. He approached once, stopped, and then turned away. Carla left early, her heels sharp against the floor, eyes forward, dignity already rationed. No scene, no shouting, just consequences arriving on time. Later, when the cake was cut and the room softened again, Grandma Rosa and I sat together near the window. City lights shimmered outside, steady and indifferent. "You did well," she said simply. I nodded. "So did you." She smiled. "I just kept the door open." Weeks passed. Treatments continued. Life recalibrated. Accounts stayed secure. Narratives corrected themselves. Richard moved out quietly, the way people do when the story no longer belongs to them. I healed. Not all at once, not neatly, but honestly. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that preparation is a form of courage and restraint can be a kind of strength, consider subscribing. These are the stories that remind us we're not powerless, even when our bodies falter. I am Elena Martinez. I am still here, and I choose clarity.